You look at Michael Douglas, and you see a man who is usually made of stone. He is the definition of Hollywood resilience. A man who has beaten cancer, navigated the most public family crisis imaginable, and maintained a career that spans half a century. But the Michael Douglas who stepped forward yesterday was someone we haven't seen before. He wasn't the polished actor or the elder statesman of cinema. He was a broken friend. And what he had to say about the death of Rob Reiner wasn't just a eulogy. It was a revelation that has completely shifted the ground beneath everyone who thought they understood this tragedy. Most people scroll past the headlines. You see Rob Reiner dead. You see son arrested. And you think you have the full picture. It fits a pattern we've seen too many times. The troubled celebrity child. The tragic ending. But you have to stop and listen to what Douglas is actually saying, because he is the only person in this entire industry who has the credibility to speak on the specific hell that Rob Reiner was living in before he died. Michael didn't just work with Rob. They were cut from the same cloth. Both were sons of legends, Kirk Douglas and Carl Reiner. Both had to fight to carve out their own names in the shadow of giants. And most hauntingly, both men fought battles with their own sons involving addiction that would have destroyed lesser families. When Michael broke his silence, he didn't do it through a publicist. He didn't release a sanitized statement on Instagram with the black square. He spoke directly, and the first thing he said sent a chill through the room. He said, "I warned him. 10 years ago, I looked Rob in the eye and I told him that unconditional love was going to get him killed." That is a sentence that is hard to process. We are taught that love is the answer, especially in a family. But Douglas is pulling back the curtain on the dynamic inside that Brentwood home that nobody else was willing to talk about. He admitted that for the last 5 years he had been slowly pulling away from the Reiner household. Not because he didn't love Rob, but because he couldn't stand to watch the slow-motion car crash that was unfolding with Nick. You have to understand the context here. Michael Douglas knows what it looks like when a son goes off the rails. The world knows about his struggles with his own son, Cameron. Michael went through the courts, the prison visits, the public shame, the terrifying nights wondering if he'd get that phone call. But Michael made choices. He set boundaries. Hard, brutal boundaries that broke his heart, but saved his life and eventually helped save his son. He sees Rob's death not just as a murder, but as a failure of intervention. He told a story about a visit to the set of, and so it goes back in 2014, a time when things were supposedly calm. Michael was there to visit Rob, and he saw Nick. He described a look in Nick's eyes that wasn't just high, and it wasn't just angry. Michael called it a vacancy. He said Nick walked onto the set, and the entire energy changed. Rob, who was the commander of his ship, the director everyone respected, suddenly shrank. This is the part that breaks your heart. Douglas described seeing Rob Reiner, a man who directed A Few Good Men, a man who could command Jack Nicholson, physically flinch when his son walked into the room. It wasn't fear of physical violence back then. It was the fear of disappointment. It was the fear of a father walking on eggshells. Michael said he pulled Rob aside that day in the trailer and asked him, "How long has he been running the house?" And Rob didn't have an answer. He just looked at the floor and said, "He's going through a lot, Michael. We just need to get him through this patch." Michael said he realized then that Rob was trapped in a loop of toxic hope. The details Douglas revealed about the final weeks leading up to the tragedy are what truly shock you. We all assumed this was a sudden snap, a moment of madness late at night. Michael says no. He says this was a slow build that everyone ignored. He revealed that 3 weeks before the murders, Rob had actually reached out to him. It was a missed call late on a Tuesday. Michael didn't see it until the next morning. When he called back, Rob played it off, sounded cheerful, talked about a new script. But Michael says he knows now that call was a cry for help. He believes Rob was on the verge of doing the one thing he had never done, kicking Nick out for good. And Michael believes that Nick sensed that shift. The tragedy, according to Douglas, isn't that Nick snapped. It's that Nick realized his parents were finally, after decades of abuse, about to draw a line. This brings up the most uncomfortable reality that Douglas forced everyone to look at: the finances. We don't like to talk about money when we talk about grief, but in Hollywood, money is the fuel for these fires. Michael Douglas was blunt. He said Rob wasn't just supporting a lifestyle. He was funding his own destruction. He revealed that Nick had access to accounts and resources that no 30-something should have without accountability. But it wasn't about spoiling the kid. It was ransom. Michael described a dynamic where Nick held his own well-being hostage. If the money stopped, Nick would threaten to harm himself, to leak stories, or to disappear. Rob and Michelle were effectively being blackmailed by their own love. They were paying for peace, paying for one more day of safety, not realizing they were financing the weapon that would eventually turn on them. What's truly keeping people glued to Douglas's words is his anger toward the enablers. He didn't name names, but he made it clear that the Reiner circle had people in it who normalized Nick's behavior. People who would say, "Oh, that's just Nick," or "He's an artist. He's volatile." Douglas called this lethal politeness. He talked about a dinner party, perhaps the same one Aaron Sorkin alluded to, or a different one, where Nick threw a glass across the room because of a perceived slight. Instead of the police being called, instead of Nick being removed, the guests just looked down at their plates. The staff cleaned it up. Rob made a joke to break the tension. Michelle apologized for him. Douglas said, "We failed them. Every single one of us who stayed at that table and didn't stand up and say, 'This is not okay,' has blood on our hands." It's rare to see Michael Douglas cry. He has a very specific, dignified way of holding himself. But when he spoke about Michelle, that composure cracked. He talked about her as the buffer. Rob was the soft heart, but Michelle was the one trying to hold the structure together. Douglas feels that Michelle was the primary target because she was the one who had started to say no. He recounted a conversation with Michelle from months ago where she sounded exhausted. She told Michael, "I don't know who he is anymore." That simple sentence, "I don't know who he is anymore," is the most terrifying thing a parent can say. It marks the moment the child is gone and the stranger has arrived. Douglas believes that on that final night, it was likely Michelle who stood her ground, and that defiance is what triggered the violence. The legal aspect of this is where Douglas becomes very pragmatic, almost cold, which makes his perspective even more valuable. He is not calling for leniency. He is not asking for the court to consider Nick's mental health history as an excuse. In fact, he is doing the opposite. He is urging the prosecutor to look at the premeditation,